Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to be covering a topic which, unfortunately, we have to cover every now and then. And our reason for covering it today is because it is directly relevant to my own experience this week, and it has been relevant to the life experience of several individuals who I know. And it's just important for us to be able to observe the fact that the path is difficult. The path is challenging. And as we proceed and progress on the path, we invariably and inevitably must face the same or similar challenges over and over again, but at more intense degrees. And this relates directly to several different facets of initiation and spiritual development that are very rarely spoken of outside of esoteric schools, because the mainstream discourse around spirituality and spiritual awakening is so vague and so filled with wishful thinking, for lack of a better expression. So we are tested. We are tested on a regular basis, and we go through periods in our life where things seem to be going in our favor and everything seems to be just rolling on autopilot, and we are just simply in a state of gratitude and allowing and receiving, and life just delivers unto us everything that we need, and it just seems like we're living in some kind of a dream. But there's an ebb and there's a flow to the process. And of course, the reason why there's an ebb and flow to the process is because of the phenomenon that I've spoken of extensively, that I've come to describe as the Alm of life. The analogous ultimate methodology. This is the spiral pattern of advancement on the path. Wherever we start here in the middle. And it just is a reality that if we look upon this shape, this image, and I'll draw a second one here with more rungs on it. If we eliminate the sides, okay, we just erase the two sides, we have something that looks very much like a ladder. Right? We have what appeared to be rungs on a ladder. And if we wish to advance to the next level, right? So if we start here in the middle and we call that, level 0, and it's 1, 2, 3. Well, actually, it's the numbering's a bit off here, but anyway, so wherever we start, wherever we're at, and we want to advance to the next level, we must descend to the next lower level, right? Before we can ascend to the next higher level. And it just follows along like this. That's that. But this shape, this process, right? This is Jacob's ladder. This is that mystical ladder that Jacob saw in his dream, on which he saw the angels ascending and descending from heaven. And what's significant about understanding and comprehending Jacob's ladder in this way is it also relates directly to what Carl Jung said when he said there is no tree whose branches reach into the heavens, whose roots do not reach down into hell. This is directly what he was referring to. This is directly what he was referring to. The fact that there is no way to advance spiritually without facing whatever it is that we must face in hell, in psychological hell. We must face our own shadow, and we must integrate that which the shadow holds, that which the shadow has to teach us and show us. And that's what he referred to as shadow work. And many people think that they understand what shadow work is. But the shadow teaches us about ourselves and what it is that we need to know about ourselves and those facets of ourselves which are in hell, which we need to liberate. The consciousness which is currently conditioned and subjected to our mechanical nature. But to face our shadow, to face our demons, as it were, our egos, this is never easy. This is never pleasant. And it entails a kind of test, a trial, an ordeal, because the word exorcise from where we get the word exorcist, that is to banish or eliminate a demon, to be liberated from demonic possession, requires that we exercise. would help if I practiced my spelling. I need to exercise my spelling. Exercise. Exercise is a form of practice, right? To get stronger, you have to exercise. To get faster, you have to exercise. To lose weight, you have to exercise. It's not enough just to diet. The word exercise and exorcise are inextricably linked. They're almost the same word. And when we think of practices, when we think of exercise, and when we think of making progress, how do we know whether or not we are making progress? We have a word for that. We test. We test ourselves. So, for example, if you lift weights and for months, well, maybe not months, but weeks, you've been lifting the same weight with the same repetitions, you may want to test yourself by increasing the weight or increasing the number of repetitions. If you're a jogger and you've been jogging 5 miles every day, you may wish to test yourself by going to 6 miles or taking a different route, a more difficult route, jogging uphill or up a mountain, or whatever it is. But you choose something that is difficult, right? That you choose something that is a challenge. To test yourself, to challenge just what am I capable of? Am I strong enough? Am I fast enough? Am I whatever? In other words, what we are testing are our limits. Where are our limits? And we have those limits because of a word that's obviously related to that. Our limitations. We have limits because there are limitations inside of us, characteristics, aspects of who we are that define where our limits are, where our limits lie. But to know what those limitations are, we must test our limits and observe ourselves as we test those limits. As we observe ourselves, as we undergo these tests, where we're bumping up against the glass ceiling of some limit, in order to know what it will take to overcome that hurdle, that obstacle, and overcome our limits, to be able to transcend our limits, to advance to a higher level, we must observe what is inside of us that is causing our limitations. And we must face that. Now, this is a generalized description that is applicable across the board in just about any kind of pursuit. I was using the example of going to the gym, or, so testing your physical limits as an athlete. And then witnessing, so if you can't lift a certain weight, or you can't run at a certain pace, and you observe yourself as you're testing your limits, you become aware of what your limitations are. Is it because so when you're lifting a certain type of lift, let's say you're doing a chest press, or you're doing uh, a pull up, where does your body give out first when you run out of reps and you can't do another rep? Where is it? A systemic fatigue? Is it a fatigue in your back? Is it a fatigue in your arms? Which part of your body gives out first? That's where you know your limitations lie, where you know the weaknesses are. And you can focus on and target those particular muscle groups or those particular attributes and target them for improvement. You can work on yourself. You can work on them. Or if you're a sprinter or a swimmer, and if it's your cardiovascular fitness that's limiting your ability to achieve some benchmark in some sport. But it's also true for if you're a musician and you're trying to learn a particularly difficult piece of music on the piano. I'm not a musician per se, but I am aware that when people study the piano, at least formally, that many piano pieces are ranked. They have a rank order of difficulty. And that when someone attends piano school, they will have a grade, much like high school. And when they pass a certain exam, a certain test, that determines whether or not they have advanced to the next grade, the next level of ability on the piano. And when they face that next level, they now try to tackle more difficult pieces of music that is whose difficulty has been graded to correspond with a certain level of ability. And when a piano player meets these new pieces of music graded at these higher levels of difficulty, they all of a sudden become very aware and very conscious of their limitations. And again, not being a pianist, I can't get into all the nitty-gritty details of fingering and what other limitations that a pianist faces when they advance to the next level. But guaranteed, the new pieces of music that they encounter are difficult. They are immediately tested. That advancing to a next level makes your present level very easy, because that's what allowed you to advance. That's what determined your advancement, that your current level, the current tests and challenges that you faced became like child's play. Again, going back to the gym analogy, right? When you began the chest press at whatever weight, 50 pounds, and you could barely do 8 reps, but now you can do 15 reps of 50 pounds, no problem. And you say to yourself, you know what? Now it's time for me to advance to 60 pounds. And you put another 10 pounds on the bar or on the machine. And then you go down to, and then all of a sudden, you can maybe barely squeeze out 7 reps. Right? It's challenging again. It's difficult. It's testing your strength. It's testing your endurance. It's testing you physically. Why? Because you've advanced to the next level. And in understanding the Alm of Life, the spiral path, when you advance to the next level, the oops, hang on a second. If the level you are at, I'm going to erase some of this. Right? If the level you were at, whatever level that was, this level, you had to go down here and you had to lift 50 pounds. And now you got it to the point where this 50 pounds was easy. You got it checked off, right? 50 pounds, easy. So now you've aced this level. You've mastered that level. So you've mastered the 50 pounds. So now you're up here, the next level. So what's the first thing you do? You add difficulty. You add challenge. You test yourself at 60 pounds. You add weight to the bar. You add difficulty. You add challenge. You add a new limit. And then you throw yourself against that limit. You test yourself at that new level. And now you're going to be down here for a while until you can master, until you can overcome this new level, this 60-pound level. And then you will master this new level. Or if you want to go back to the piano analogy, you move up to the next grade in piano. Now you're dealing with more difficult music. But it's difficult. It's hard. It's challenging. Why? Because you're not yet at that level. Because what's testing you now, what's testing your limits, is there to help you get to the next level. And whether it's physical activity, whether it's any skill, any ability, it could be culinary skills, it could be craftsmanship, it could be becoming a master plumber, it could be anything. This universal process has to take place because we can only ever face a challenge, a test that we've been prepared for. There's no point in going into a gym tomorrow and lying down on the bench and trying to bench press 400 pounds. There's no point in that. You won't be able to do it unless you have been a professional bodybuilder or a professional strong person, strong man, strong woman, who's been training all of your life and worked up to that weight class. And any good coach, any good trainer will start you off at an appropriate challenge that is tuned to your level, whatever level that is. Right? Children in kindergarten or grade 1, they're not taught long division. They're not taught algebra and calculus. They're not taught Shakespeare. No, they read Dr. Seuss or, or whatever picture books, or at the kindergarten level, grade 1, really, they're just being taught their ABCs, aren't they? And getting even that's too advanced for them. They get into Dr. Seuss, maybe grade, I don't know, 3 or 4. Who knows? It's hard for me to remember back that far. I was reading Dr. Seuss, I think, in grade 2. But apparently Dr. Seuss is banned now because it's not politically correct, but that's a different issue. The point is that the tests that we face when we go through this process of the Alm of Life, naturally, when we face new tests at new levels, they're going to seem overwhelming. They're going to hit us like a ton of bricks. And sometimes these tests, these trials, these ordeals, that are another word for test, right? Trials, ordeals, difficulties, challenges. Sometimes these challenges come in forms that are very unpleasant, very frightening even, very discouraging, very sometimes humiliating, sometimes heartbreaking. For example, medical challenges. And what's being tested might be multifaceted, might not be whatever test or trial that we're facing. That test or trial may be testing, for instance, our devotion, our faith. Almost certainly, in the case of medical ordeals, illnesses, sicknesses. I know personally I went through such an ordeal, and it was the trial, the test was designed in such a way that it was there to show me my limitations. And I've spoken about it often before because of my adult onset epilepsy. And I was in London Health Sciences epilepsy clinic here in Canada. And I was there for several weeks with a couple holes drilled in my head and wires put against my skull, and they were inducing seizures and everything else. And in the end of all of that, they said to me, well, we're going to cut out a quarter of your brain and we'll give you 50-50 odds of curing your epilepsy. And you can imagine what kind of test, what kind of challenge what kind of difficulty this was. I was having several seizures a day prior to going into that center, and I was completely unresponsive to medication, and nothing worked. Nobody seemed to help me. So when I finally got into one of the top epilepsy clinics in Canada, this was really my last hope. And the best that they could offer was 50-50 chance of curing my seizures. Oh, but at the cost of a quarter of my brain being cut out. In that particular instance, that test was to show me the limitations of materialist science, of allopathic healthcare, of doctors who understood the mind and the psyche as a product of the brain, and the limitations that they were bumping up against, and the limitations of their understanding meant that they wanted to basically butcher my brain to help me, but at 50-50 odds. But that test, that trial, that ordeal revealed to me something about myself. And that was for several years. I had been in control. I had been the one driving a process to try to heal, to try to cure myself, or find a treatment program that worked. And so here I was at the end of my rope. I had exhausted all of my worldly faculties, all of my worldly resources, all of my worldly solutions or prospects at a solution. And the best that I could come up with through the allopathic healthcare system was 50-50 chance. But I have to give up a quarter of my brain. And the limitation that was shown to me was the limits of a mortal to truly be in control and in command of their destiny. Right? Because as a mortal, we only have access to the physical world and allopathic healthcare and our resources, right? So when we reach the end of our rope, when we face a test, a trial, an ordeal that we cannot overcome, that ordeal, that test reveals a limitation that is inherent to our nature. So what then is the test? What then is the solution to the test? If you have a limitation inherent to your nature that prevents you from overcoming an obstacle to your destiny, but there's something about your very nature that is a limitation, that limits you, that bars you from overcoming that obstacle and proceeding on your destiny, then what does that tell you? Told me very clearly that I was not qualified. My nature as a mortal, I had reached my limits. I had reached a hard limit on my capacity, on my ability to overcome a test, a trial, an ordeal that I was facing, but that I couldn't overcome. So who could? For those of you who know this story, you know that I came back from London Health Sciences Epilepsy Center, and I turned on the computer and I opened up Google and I got down on my knees and I prayed. And what I prayed was, I am not qualified. I know my limits now. I've exhausted my limitations, or I'm up against my limitations and they're staring me in the face. But me, as a mortal being, am facing something that is beyond my wheelhouse, and it is frankly beyond the wheelhouse of Canada's top epilepsy specialist and his surgeons, who are running a chop shop there, and a kind of gambling casino, a kind of Russian roulette with people's brains and people's lives. I ran into the hard limit of materialist science and my own ingenuity and cleverness and resourcefulness, right? I ran into the hard limitations that the medical condition that I was facing was not of this world, was not a physical phenomenon, was not a materialist phenomenon, it was not an allopathic phenomenon. So how was allopathic healthcare and materialist science going to provide me with a solution? Well, we'll just cut out that part of the brain. And that I just knew that that was not the right approach. But what was the right approach? How was I going to come up with the right approach? The answer was, I wasn't going to come up with the right approach. I was not qualified. I was facing a test, a trial, an ordeal, which was not meant for mere mortals to face. But here I was, facing it. And that's when I made a leap of faith. If you will bear with me just a moment, while we go back to our Jacob's ladder here. At some point in our journey, I'm going to um, let's okay, we're going to work with that one. At some point in our journey, right, we begin at the level that we are at. And the first few levels, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's. We call them human, or we call them mortal. We're going through tests and challenges and ordeals which relate to what we might call typical human beings, or the human experience. But on the spiritual path, right? Eventually, we get to a level where we go into a kind of hell and we hit a wall. And we can't proceed, we can't progress past it, and we get stuck. And many of us, we feel like we get stuck, and we're not progressing. And sometimes this is allegorized, and we can spend a great deal of time down in hell, and sometimes we have to. And sometimes that being stuck, that can feel like, or it's allegorized in the Bible as being lost in the desert, or wandering in the desert. That can be part of it, and it can be an extended period of time. And the reason is that we've been living our life as a mortal, as a human, and we've been using our own ingenuity, our mortal faculties, or our strengths and abilities that were enough, that served us well to overcome the tests and the trials that we faced. But eventually, we hit a wall, a block, that we cannot overcome. And that there's no mortal, worldly, like, we're stuck, we're blocked. We've faced the immovable object. And despite the fact that our life up until then seems to have been driven by the irresistible force, but now we're confronted with the immovable object. So now what? It's a standoff, it's a stalemate. We are blocked. And we feel stuck, or we feel lost. We have all sorts of words. And we say, we lose hope. We can feel defeated, and all of these negative emotions can wash over us as we're down and stuck in hell. And we sometimes can feel forlorn or forsaken, abandoned, etc. But all of these emotions and all of these negative beliefs around, running into this wall, these are all what make us mortal. You see, what we've been relying on, what we've been doing, our winning formula that has gotten us this far, but now, bang, into that wall. The very faculties, the cleverness, the resourcefulness, the ingenuity that got us this far now is the source of our limitations, and the source of our suffering, and the source of our negativity. And what do? We shake our fist at the heavens and we say, God has forsaken us. No, God has not forsaken us. Our mortality has forsaken us. Our mortality has reached its limits. Or rather, we have encountered a test. We are being tested that reveals to us the limits of our mortality, of our humanity, of our cleverness, our ingenuity, our logic, our persistence, our cleverness, our resourcefulness, maybe even our monetary resources. If you happen to be a wealthy individual and maybe you've paid for the most expensive physicians or the most expensive trainers or the most expensive teachers, the point is that at some point in our journey, there will be a level, a next level of advancement. And this next level, this new level, right? This new level is not for mortals. Because we're talking about Jacob's ladder. We're talking about angels ascending from heaven, from earth to heaven and descending from heaven to earth. At some point, there is a threshold. At some point, there is a level where the mere mortal ends and something else takes over, because we are crossing over the threshold between two worlds, between two realities. But in order to ensure that we know that and that we are operating on that higher level, we have to face a block, a test that only that higher faculty in us can overcome. That higher faculty is our higher self, is our true self, our innermost being, the being in human being. It's inevitable. You cannot advance on the spiritual path until at some point you do not make this switch, this flip, where you say, I am not qualified. I am just a mortal what? I'm just a mortal vessel and a servant. Because eventually you will hit a point where the next level of advancement we're talking about the levels of the monad now. We're talking about levels of your divine vessel, your divine soul, not your mortal self. As I've explained very often, your mortal self can never leave this reality. Your mortal self is like the character in a video game. And yes, you get to a point in the game where you develop your character to a certain point, to a certain level, but after which your success in the game world depends on the skill of the player. And there's no real character development anymore. It has much more to do with the skill and the knowledge and the experience of the player. And that's what we're talking about here. Because the hardest tests that we face are tests like this. They're tests of faith. They're tests of where we have to face the reality that we're just mortal vessels and servants. We're a 3D flesh and blood spacesuit. So our innermost being can be here and now in 3D space. But that we will face tests and trials and ordeals here of such a nature that their solution cannot and will not come from 3D space or from the faculties of a 3D mortal character existing within this 3D space. The answer, the solution, comes from above, comes from within. To put that another way, if you're familiar with track and field, and you're familiar with the 4x400 relay or the 4x100 relay, you know that each runner must at some point pass the baton. They hand off the baton to the next runner. But many of us, because we've been misled, or because we suffer from mystic pride, or because some of our limitations include fear and we have a tendency to give up in the face of impossible odds or an impossible obstacle. When we feel stuck or lost or forsaken, we might take on a victim mentality. There's all sorts of ways that the mortal can get trapped and get bogged down and stuck in front of that wall. And they can get really frustrated and depressed when they face this test that they just can't seem to be able to pass. A test for whose solution just eludes them. But that is precisely the point of such tests. They're not meant for you. They're not your test. You're not qualified to solve those tests. Just as I wasn't qualified to find the solution to the hell of epilepsy that I was living in. There is a word. Well, anyway, let's get to a couple comments really quick. Benjamin Raphael says, yes, being in the wilderness is oftentimes a symbol of being stuck or confused. And he says, intellect will get you to the door, but not into the house. And he says that's an ancient saying. Well, it's a good saying. It's very true. One of the things about facing our limits, and you know, I lift weights, right? That's one of the forms of exercise that I prefer to do. And I can tell you that you can be uh, doing many reps on the weight that you've been doing for I don't know how long, and then you decide, you know what, it's time for me to up my weight, and then you go up 5 pounds or 10 pounds, and all of a sudden you feel like you've never lifted weights in your life because even that small incremental change so reduces the number of reps that you can do. It makes you feel like you've never lifted before. That experience can be very humbling. When you have advanced to the next level and then face a new challenge that now makes you feel weak again by comparison, right? Your relative strength feels like it's been reduced because the weight that you're lifting is incrementally so much higher. But that's a humbling experience because this new test, this new trial, this new ordeal shows you your limitations. You weren't, or you're not as strong as you thought you were. So when you face a trial or an ordeal that you can't overcome, that you exhaust all of your faculties, and you still can't solve it, you still can't overcome it, it's very humbling. It borders on humiliating. And you see yourself as being this small and insignificant player in a story, in a journey that is far greater than you. A journey and a story that is not being written by you, but which up until that point you believed you were the author of your journey. But now it's clear that you're not the author of your journey, because why would you have authored yourself a challenge that you cannot overcome, that you cannot write the solution for you, the hero, to overcome that journey, that obstacle? So something else is at work. Something else is at play. You're just a player, and that there's a hand of providence writing your story. So in that humiliation, in that humbling shadow of that wall that you keep banging your head up against, in that humility lies the opportunity to overcome the test. In humility lies the secret to the solution to the trial. In my case, it was opening up Google, getting down on my knees and praying to my innermost being, and praying and accepting and admitting to myself and to my higher self and to my divine mother, I am not qualified. I have exhausted all of my abilities and capabilities as a mere mortal. I've exhausted the allopathic healthcare system. I've allowed myself to have holes drilled in my head and be monitored like some lab rat or like Neo plugged into the Matrix, and have allowed these people to induce seizures and monitor brain activity and do all sorts of other examinations and tests on me. And the best that they can offer is to chop out a quarter of my brain and give me 50-50 odds. That's the best that I could do. And that's not good enough. I know it's not good enough. You whispered to me through the still soft voice, there's a better way. There's another way. So here I am. I've opened up Google. At my fingertips is the wealth of worldly knowledge. Tell me what to type into Google and I will type it. Because my life is effectively over. I've exhausted all of my skills and abilities, and I can't solve this problem. This problem which has brought my life to a screeching halt. I can't go on like this. I'm not going to have much of a life going on like this. And I know that if they go and if I allow them to butcher me, then I won't have much of a life after that either. So because my life is effectively forfeit, if you give me back my life will belong to you. This was my prayer to my own innermost, to my higher self, to my innermost essence of God, my innermost intimate Christ and my divine mother. My life is forfeit. My life is over. If you give me back my life and set me back on the path, then my life and my path will belong to you forevermore. Because it will only be because of you that I'm back on track and that I have a life. This is the shift. This is the flip that everyone on the path must eventually face. And that in order to overcome, there's no way for a mortal to overcome this block. Right? Only the higher self. This is where someone makes the shift, right? From mere mortal to higher self. Right? Or, to higher self. This is where your life gets turned upside down. And you stop living for you and you start living for your higher self. Why? Because it was your higher self who gave you back your life. It was your higher self who allowed you to overcome whatever this obstacle was that prevented you from getting to this level. But make no mistake, right? From this level onward, it's your higher self that you have to put your faith and trust in. And you have to live your life from that place because your life is not yours anymore. Your life ends. Your life ends at whatever this level was before you descended and faced this wall. That's where your life ended. Where you could live as a mortal by mortal means to mortal ends. You see, too many people in the spiritual world and the New Age or whatever, or religious, whatever, they think that God and spirituality is here for their benefit. And it's exactly the reverse. God is not here for your benefit. You are here for God's benefit. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where in that equation do your desires come into the picture? You have a purpose in life. You have a purpose for being here. But that purpose is not the purpose of a mortal. That purpose is the purpose of your innermost immortal, your true self, your higher self, that's going to come through you into the world. But in order for that to happen, you have to cooperate. You must accept that mission impossible, if you will. That mission impossible which comes to you from on high. But in order to demonstrate that commitment, right, to prove that you are ready, that you have faced that humiliation, that you have been humbled, and that you accept the reality of what it means to be a vessel and a servant. And there's only one way to be sure. And that is to be given a test of faith, to have your faith tested. Now, what is faith? For those of you who have watched regularly, you know that I talked about this before. The word faith, let's make some room. Unfortunately, people erroneously think that faith means belief. But that is not true. That is a degenerated version of true faith. Belief, we could say belief is blind faith. But true faith derives from the word to be faithful. To be faithful, as in to be faithful to your spouse, or as a dog is faithful to its master. To be faithful, to be full of loyalty, to be full of devotion, to your innermost immortal beloved. In the same way that to be faithful to your spouse means to be loyal and to be devoted to your mortal beloved. your immortal beloved, your divine mother, and your innermost intimate Christ, which seeks to be born into the world through you, that requires a spiritual birth, to be born of your individual divine mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti, through you into the world. That is the faith and devotion and loyalty that you owe your innermost immortal beloved. The way that a husband owes his faithfulness, loyalty, and devotion to his wife and to his unborn child. And a husband will do anything and everything to protect his wife and his unborn child, and see to it that they are both safe and able to fulfill that beautiful mystery which we call procreation, so that that living embodiment, that physical embodiment of the divine feminine, can birth into the world a product of their sacred union, the birth of a child. And that's why the nativity has such an important meaning in the Christian tradition, that the Christ is born into the world through the sacred union of masculine and feminine. That is a union of faithfulness. That is true faith. Union to becoming one in order to create, to birth a third who is the product of both, and in many ways is greater than the sum of the two which united. Because when we're talking about the birth of Christ, then we're absolutely talking about something that is orders of magnitude infinitely greater than the coming together of the two mortals who birthed that Christ into the world. And that's what the topic of last week's lecture was all about, right? Last week's live stream was all about sexual alchemy and white tantra. But we as individuals, when we have a test of faith, it is our faithfulness, our loyalty, our devotion to our higher self, to our innermost. Eduardo adds, I would add that faith includes a sort of knowing beyond that which is, and so does not require a blind obedience to a thing or a person. No. So we're not talking about blind faith. We're not talking about blind obedience. When we talk about faith, the knowing that you speak of is like, yeah, that self-evident experiential knowledge, to know in the biblical sense of the word. So, in the Bible, the way the Bible is written, they say, Adam knew Eve, right? And they use that word to know. Knew means to have united, right? To have bonded, to know intimately, in other words. Faith is to know intimately. So to know your God with all your heart and all your mind at the exclusion of all others, that's faithfulness. That's true faith. That you know the will of your innermost being, and you know you know your place and you know what you need to do because of the virtue of the faith that you have, the loyalty and devotion that you have to this task of bringing into the world the will of the Father. And that's all an allegory, an analogy of bringing into the world the Christ. Because it's faithfulness that is the vehicle to that. You must know your spouse to be able to procreate. You must know your spouse in the biblical sense and to the exclusion of all others if you wish to be faithful. That's the definition of faithful. So that's where that word know is beyond belief. You cannot believe yourself into being faithful to your spouse. And you cannot believe yourself into being faithful to God. It's a knowing. You have to know your innermost God intimately. And that's union. That's what the words yug and religare mean. And those are the root words of yoga and religion. They both mean union. Alexi says, hi. Hi, Alexi. That's a new name that we don't recognize, so welcome. So a test of faith is a test of that devotion. And it's a test of what you know. Just like in school, you're tested on what you know. But the most important thing that we as mortals need to know is that we're not qualified to be anything other than a vessel and a vehicle. In the same way that a husband needs to know his place in the order of things when it comes to giving birth to a child, right? A husband needs to know, but it's not enough to believe. It's not enough to intellectualize. He must know his wife in the biblical sense. And he must know the part that he has to play and the role that he plays in the family. And into making sure that his wife is able to safely and successfully undertake the 9 months of pregnancy and to safely deliver their child into the world. This is a knowing that a husband has to embody. It's not enough for him to believe, he has to live it. He must prove his faithfulness. And his faithfulness will be tested. But he has to know that he's not qualified in certain ways to do certain things. Right? He has to know his limits. He has to know his limitations. Which is why the nuclear family has existed for tens of thousands of years, and why it has been the most successful paradigm that humanity has been able to come up with thus far in organizing itself in society. But that perhaps is another issue, another question. The point is, and that's the point of today's talk, is that A vessel is qualified to carry, let's say, the water from the well, from the eternal spring, from the fountain. A vessel is qualified to be filled with that water and to carry that water from the fountain to the village, to the table, and pour forth that water into the cups that are on the table. Right? But the vessel has to know its place and its purpose and its limits. If a vessel is filled with grain, or a vessel is filled with sand or gravel or any other object, any other substance, that vessel cannot carry the same amount of water from the fountain. This is why the Buddha said you must empty your cup. The vessel is far more useful, far more powerful, far more capable as a vessel when it is empty, because then it is so much free, more free to be filled up with the life-giving waters from the spring, and can carry more of those waters within it, the more empty it is. And so that vessel will have to face some kind of a test, some kind of a trial, some kind of an ordeal that reveals the limits and limitations that it has. In the Bible, there's the story of the wedding of Canaan, where Jesus transforms the water into wine. And while this is an allegory for, primarily an allegory for sexual alchemy and the transmutation of the sexual waters, right? Especially because it's around a wedding and so on. That alchemy, that transmutation of water into wine extends to ourselves, to the vessels. Because at the wedding, the guests, in order to celebrate the sanctity of the marriage, in order to bless the union with the according celebratory beverage, the vessels that were filled just with water are transformed and transmuted, they are now filled with wine, delicious wine. And the sacred union of masculine and feminine can now proceed, and the great revelry and the celebration of that divine union can take place. But it was the water that was transmuted and transformed. Because the vessels knew their place. They were just vessels. But if the vessel says, no, 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 I'm water, and I'm a vessel of water, and that's what I am, and that's why I'm here. If we resist, if we do not empty our cup, if we do not allow that which is inside of us to be transmuted by a force greater than us, a power greater than us, that alchemical metaphysical science that is outside the realm of our mechanical understanding. We cannot participate in that revelry, in that celebration. We cannot pour forth the liquid, the beverage, the celebratory drink that is worthy of the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of union of masculine and feminine. Because we're just a vessel. A vessel does its greatest work when it recognizes its humility, that it is a servant. Its purpose is to serve, is to draw forth and carry and serve. That's what a vessel does. And so we will be tested. Whether or not we are empty, whether or not we are capable of emptying ourselves out, whether we are willing to undergo the metaphysical magic of transmuting our water into wine, which, again, we talked about at length last week when we talked about sexual alchemy and the transmutation of lust into love, of lead into gold, of water into wine. But the mortal vessel is just the mortal vessel. This is where people get delusions of grandeur and believe that God and spirituality and divine power is mine to have and mine to possess and mine to control. And unlimited abundance and manifesting my desires, and on and on and on and on and on it goes. No. A vessel draws forth water from the earth, and like at the wedding of Canaan, through the union of masculine and feminine, undergoes the divine metaphysical science of transmutation. And that water becomes wine. And then that vessel serves that wine to the attendants of the wedding, pours forth that wine into the world to celebrate the great union, the creative act. But the vessel doesn't change. The vessel is just the vessel. Alexi also says, thank you, happy to be here. Well, we're happy to have you. So when we face these tests, these trials, these ordeals, and their purpose is to humble us, is to remind us of who we really are and what our purpose really is. and we pass the baton, if you don't mind me mixing some metaphors from today. We pass the baton to he who is qualified, and that's our higher self. And from that point forward, when the solution to the problem is revealed to us, and we finally can overcome that obstacle, that hurdle, which had been standing in our way, that we had been banging our head up against that wall, unable to pass that test. But we finally hand that test over to our innermost being and say, I'm not qualified. This test is beyond me. This is not my test. This is your test. Or more aptly put, this is our test. And I cannot overcome this test without you. That's when the solution comes. When I prayed about my epilepsy and I said, my life is over, but if you give me my life back, I pledge that life to you. The still soft voice spoke and said, type epilepsy diet lifestyle into Google. And I did. And up came 250,000 results. And I hung my head and I shrugged, and I'm like, feeling very defeated and very humiliated and frustrated. And the still soft voice whispered, relax. Just scroll down. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, and then stop. Click on that. And I clicked on it. And for those of you who've read my book, or those of you who have been around here for a while, you know that that link took me here to this website, dogtorj.com, food intolerance in pets and their people. And this veterinarian, he developed this thing that he called the GARD, right? Which he initially called the glutamate aspartate restricted diet, but later on he changed the name to gut absorption recovery diet. And I read this website back and forth, cover to cover, and this website hasn't changed in the 15 years, or maybe it's closer to 20 now, when I first found it. I put myself on this diet the next day, and immediately my seizures stopped. And I had myself on this diet for over 9 months, and my neurologist was monitoring my EEG activity on a regular basis, about once a month. And he progressively saw my EEGs improving month after month after month after month while on this diet. Until eventually, 9 months onto this diet, my EEG came back normal, no signs of epilepsy whatsoever. Now, I wasn't cured by any stretch of the imagination, but I went from having multiple seizures a day to being able to take a test, an epilepsy test, at the epilepsy center, and the results came up normal. And ever since then, I've been true to my word. And I no longer live my life for me. I live my life in accordance with my innermost being, whose name is Attlas Alex. and that's, I've been doing this live stream for going on 5 years. Well, yeah, we're in our fifth season, and then I have many years of writing articles, blogging, and I just completely devoted myself to spiritual development and to doing my life's work. And most recently, speaking of websites, I told you guys I was working on Atlas Conscious Arts. And I actually completed the website. Um, the goal of which is to put meaning and purpose and magic, right, back into marketing and and branding and media, because it's been completely stripped out by corporations. So the URL is atlas.ca. Atlas, that's for Atlas Conscious Arts. And my partner Eduardo, who's here in the chat, he came up with this. He said, "Give STEM the A it so desperately needs." So STEM is science, technology, engineering, math. But without the A, of course, stands for arts, right? STEM limits us to rigid stocks of subsistence harvesting and binary separation of left brain industry 4.0. STEAM is needed to power the whole-brained tri-unity engines of the fifth industrial revolution. Brands that art below as they art above. Logos embodying and actualizing the logos of being. It's putting the soul, the heart and soul, back into the human enterprise. And these are just some of the industries that we've targeted and whatnot. And then, of course, we have the process, which is the Alm of Life. And, well, and then we have some blog articles and so on. So I was under the gun to get all of this done, get all this completed. And it wasn't surprising that soon after I completed this, and this represented an advancement on some higher level, that I immediately fell into a very deep depression and was once again plunged into hell. Then I was facing uh, again this challenge, this test on a whole new level, and I had been suffering from that all week, and it only seemed appropriate to devote today's live stream to the process of the Alm of Life and to the process of the ascent and descent on the Alm of Life, on that spiral. And remind everyone that no matter what level you think you've gotten to, there's always higher levels. There's always more progress to be had. And that progress always comes through a process of testing, of being tested, and of hollowing out our vessel and transmuting more of that water into wine, transmuting the lead into gold, of letting go and letting God. There's a million different ways we can say it. But we face our adversary, we face our demons, and that's what they're there for. They are there to be the adversary that we alone cannot overcome. That if we try to face that adversary alone, we will fail, we will be stuck. We have to meditate, we have to pray, we have to observe ourselves, and we have to know our place and hand over the baton. Allow ourselves to be moved in this life so that we can fulfill our purpose on the path. Because there are higher levels that are not meant for mortals and that mortals cannot transcend. And this brings me to the language, the trial by fire. There's actually trial by fire, trial by water, trial by air, and trial by earth. We can face obstacles and ordeals that encompass any number of elements. In other words, we have those trials and ordeals that burn. We have other trials and ordeals that can be associated with water, be very fluidic, or they can actually literally involve floods or I know, some plumbing disaster of some kind, right? And there's water everywhere. So we can face many challenges and tests and trials in our life that are uniquely related to a particular element. These are very much related to initiations in the supernal worlds. And I just want to touch on those briefly because they are literally the tests and challenges and trials that our innermost being undertakes in the supernal worlds. We don't think about this because initiations don't belong to us. We don't have access to our innermost being going through the initiation process in the supernal worlds and being tested above as we are being tested below. We just experience the whatever analogous ordeal that we have to go through down here. But it's entirely necessary for us to let go and let God and be guided, allow ourselves to be guided by our intuition and to act without fear, to act with faith. And especially when we find ourselves confronted with some, veritable near disaster of a flood or a fire or something around, and just we allow ourselves to be just taken over as if we were on autopilot. But autopilot is not the right expression, but just it's like the compulsion, the impulse to act comes and we have to go with it. Not out of fear, not out of mechanical instinct or some reaction, but a conscious knowing of what needs to be done and just go and do it. And in those moments, allow ourselves again to, in all humility, to be the vessel, to be the vehicle for God's will, because our innermost being is undergoing a trial by fire, or a trial of water, or a trial of earth, or a trial of wind in the supernal worlds, an initiation. And we must endure, and we must undertake down below the corresponding trial and ordeal related to the initiation above that our innermost is going through within. So whenever we, well, here, let's get to this. Alexi says, I was following you during the pandemic. Happy you are still doing what you do. Great work. Oh, thank you, Alexi. And appreciate that. The tests, then, the trials that we face are preparing us for the next level. But again, from our perspective, and I just bring it back to the feeling of facing a new weight in the gym. Like, you can't help but feel weak, right? When you've been lifting 50 pounds for so long, and now you know 50 pounds is like a piece of cake. Then you put 60 pounds, and then you try to lift that, and it feels like, oh my God, it feels like you've regressed because you can barely squeeze out 8 reps now. We're going to feel that way. Just like the pianist who mastered the last grade, but now he's facing Bach or he's facing Rachmaninoff, and he's trying to play these more advanced pieces, and he's like stumbling all over himself, and he can't even play these relatively simple pieces by Bach or Rachmaninoff. Simple. And he feels like he feels like, I've made no progress. But of course, he's made tremendous progress because he's now playing these pieces at a whole different level. The game has changed. And if you've played video games, maybe you've felt like that, where you've advanced to the next difficulty level in a video game, and all of a sudden, the video game makes you feel like a complete noob, like you've never played that game before. Why? You're dying all the time. It's like, how is this possible? I just completed the game on normal difficulty level, and I aced it on normal difficulty level. Now I bump up the difficulty level 1 notch, and now it's like I've never played the game before. Well, that's the whole point of difficulty levels, right? They test us, they challenge us, they demand that we improve and come up to match them and reach them. And that if we were resting on our laurels and we were like a lazy gamer sitting back half asleep gaming, but the next difficulty level, you can't game like that on the next difficulty level. You have to be focused, you have to be concentrated. You have to be aware of what you're doing. You have to engage more of your faculties, more of your consciousness in order to be able to tackle that new difficulty level. In spirituality, it's no difference. Only what's different is we have to hand the baton over to our innermost being, our higher self, right? When we face that obstacle, that it's just doesn't matter what we do or how we do it or how we try to do it. It's like, it's not, because it's not our obstacle. It's an obstacle for our innermost. And that's when we resolve with all humility and allow and become the vessel and vehicle for our innermost being. And our innermost shows us the way, and shows us the way to overcome that obstacle. And from that point forward, there's no going back. There's no turning back. Because once you reach one such obstacle, and it requires surrender to your higher self to proceed, that means you are now at a level where it's going to require your higher self from here on in. There's no point in turning back. There's no point in going back to your old ways. But your shadow self, your demons, will try to get you to do that. And that's when you will be facing your adversary, your shadows, at a whole different level, at a whole deeper level of hell. Because in the past, you have faced them at this level and this level, but now you're going to be facing them at ever deeper levels, right? Because you're going to want to continue this process of advancing to ever higher levels, or at least your innermost being is going to want to keep advancing. And so you're going to have to keep facing what you faced here and here and here and here and here and here. You have to comprehend and eliminate your egos in all 49 levels of the mind. 7 times 7 octaves, right? So all 49 levels. And you're going to face off against those egos again, and it's going to feel like you're facing them for the first time. You're not facing them for the first time, you're facing them for the first time at this level. And that was definitely the case for me this week. And because it was the case for me this week, and I was very humbled and humiliated as a mortal, right? Because I'm not immune to mystic pride. I still have those mortal emotions. And here I am once a week for 5 years now. All of you have been coming here and seeking guidance and advice. And I'm happy to deliver it. I'm happy to do the will of my innermost and Attlas and share with you all of this. But the reason why this channel is called Attlas Information is because I'm still in progress, right? And so, by sharing that and sharing the conscious progress of that with all of you, maybe you can learn something from it. Learn something from my mistakes, learn something from my suffering, and know that it doesn't get any easier, but it doesn't have to be harder either. If you grasp what I'm trying to express here, it is what it is. And the adversary that we face is commensurate with whatever level that we are here to achieve. And that if we do achieve that level, there's another level and another level and another level, and the adversary will always be matched according to that next level. Right? The weight on the bar is always going to be matched to the muscles that you have to lift it. And then the more you lift that weight, the stronger you become. Eventually, you get to a point where that weight is too easy. And lifting that bar doesn't make you stronger anymore. Doesn't make you weaker, but it doesn't make you stronger. So now it's time to put more weight on the bar. And when more weight is added to the bar, naturally, of course, you're going to feel weak again. You're going to feel like you're a weakling because now you're trying to lift more weight. And it's just how it goes. This is just the process. And it's always like this. And so when you feel yourself or find yourself like you're repeating the same mistakes of the past, and why it seems to be like you're on a cycle of you're on cloud 9 and then boom, you go down into hell and you're lost in the desert again. It's like this is the process of climbing Jacob's ladder. You have to go down into hell before you can get to the next level in heaven. And every time you descend into hell, it's a new test or it's an old test at a new level. So you have to be charitable to yourself, and you have to recognize that this isn't easy. Nothing that is worth doing in life is ever easy. Because if it's easy, then what's the point? Why is it worth doing if it's so easy? Then everybody would be doing it. Like we marvel at great works and great achievements, not because they were easy, but because they were hard. And we recognize the sacrifice and the commitment, the devotion that those individuals had in order to realize such works in the world, to make such enterprises come to life, and to deliver unto the world the fruits of their labors. And we have tremendous appreciation and gratitude and awe and wonder for the fruits of their labors and for the enterprise that they undertook, that they were compelled to undertake from within, and that they were so devoted to, that they were so faithful to. But as you face your own endeavors, as you face your own enterprise of life, your own heroic journey, remember to be charitable to yourself. Remember to be very skeptical of those voices in your head that are going to bubble up when you face a new test and say, "Ah, you're not as strong as you thought you were." Or you're weak, or you look, you're facing the same thing again, or oh, you've slipped right back down into your old habits and whatnot. Because those voices will come, and they will try, the voices of self-sabotage and self-judgment and self-loathing, and they will want to get you hooked on old habits and old uh, addictions and obsessions that you thought you had conquered, that you thought you would overcome. You might have conquered them and overcome them at that level, but now you're at a whole different level. And because you're at a whole different level, you got to face them all over again at that level, and it's that much harder. So you got to dig that much deeper, and the deeper you dig within yourself, eventually you pass yourself entirely, and you're now in the domain of yourself, your higher self, your deeper self, your truer self, your innermost self. And that's when you hand off the baton and say, I'm not qualified to handle this. I can't do this without your help. I need you. I am you. I'm nothing without you. That's what a vessel says to the spring. I am nothing. A vessel, an earthen vessel, is nothing without the spring that feeds it, that fills it with the life-giving water that it carries to the village and it pours forth into the cups. An earthen vessel is nothing without that fountain of sweet ambrosia filling it up. That's why the humiliation and the humility is so important. Because if we think too highly of ourselves when things are good, when things go to hell, that pride immediately flips into shame and self-loathing. You know what I'm talking about. I'm a broken record. I'm a freaking pirate parrot, just repeating on over and over and over. Shame and pride are two sides of the same coin. Pride doesn't care if we love ourselves too much or we hate ourselves. It doesn't care. So if we're all high and mighty on ourselves, on the top of the swing, on the top of the spiral, when we next have to descend, and then we slam into that wall, we face that new test, and it's a hard test, and we're weak and we can't handle it and everything else. What we were high and mighty on immediately flips into, oh, you're a loser, you're weak, you're this, you're that, you're nothing. You thought you were hot shit, but now you're nothing, and this and that, right? And now it's all judgment, self-judgment, self-loathing, shame, guilt, right? So that's why you hand off that baton, so that when you next reach the next high point, you live in gratitude, and you live in humility, and you thank your innermost being, and you thank your divine mother for getting you through hell, and that you couldn't have done it without them, that you are nothing without them. You are just a vessel. So that when the next time you go down into hell and those voices come up and say, oh, you're weak and this and that and the other thing, so you say, you know what? I'm not weak. I'm not a failure. I'm just not qualified. I was never qualified. I'm just a vessel. And right now, down in hell, I'm a vessel that's being filled up with all this vitriol and all this self-loathing and all this doubt and all this guilt and all this shame. Sure, but I can see it for what it is. I just have to empty that out and make room and make space within myself so that I can be filled up with the the fountain within can fill me up. And together we're going to overcome whatever it is we need to overcome down here. And you have the faith that that will happen, so long as you get all of that garbage out of the way of yourself. If you get yourself out of the way of yourself, you hand the baton over to your divine mother and your innermost, who are qualified, who are qualified. But that's the real test. Alexi says, you helped me during those times to understand more about the road ahead. Well, I'm glad, and I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful, and I hope today is helpful. Behind me, you see the phoenix. And if I move enough out of the way, well, I can't move my chair out of the way. So there's actually the character of the Phoenix from the X-Men there. So that's Jean Grey. So it's, being a woman, she's the Divine Mother, and especially as the Phoenix, right? In the X-Men. The trial by fire, one of the beautiful aspects of the earthen vessel as an analogy is that, as you probably know, earthenware, right, ceramics, they are fired in the kiln. And it's also interesting that we call it a kiln, right? It's an oven, but we call it a kiln. I always thought it was curious that the word kiln and kill are so similar. So the potter shapes the clay on the wheel, and makes this vessel, and then it's fired in the kiln, and all of the moisture, of course, is dried out of the clay, and the clay is baked in that kiln, fired in the kiln, and it becomes hardened, and in such a way that it can now you can fill it up with water, and it won't become soggy again, right? It won't absorb that water anymore, or at least not so much that it loses its capacity to that it loses its integrity. So in many ways, when we face these tests, these trials by fire, as vessels, we can conceptualize ourselves being fired in the kiln that are making us stronger, harder vessels, more capable, with greater integrity, greater capacity. And the phoenix is also that mythical creature that dies in flames, is consumed by the flames, and it rises anew from the ashes, reborn from the ashes. In a very real sense, this is what this spiral path of the Alm of Life is showing us and teaching us with each revolution. That revolution has that double meaning, to revolve, but also to revolt. And in the kiln, the vessel is fired, and in that firing of the vessel, it revolts against its muddied nature, its soft, malleable nature. And there's a revolution that takes place in that kiln. The clay dies and is reborn in a hardened state, as a ceramic, as an earthenware, as stoneware. It becomes as stone, useful, purposeful as a vessel, whereas before you can't use soft clay as a vessel. It absorbs the water, and it becomes like mud. So the trial by fire is what, in the kiln, it's like the phoenix dies in the flames, and what's reborn from the ashes is this greater, more powerful, more capable phenomenon. All of this speaks directly to these tests and these trials that we face, where no matter what we achieved before, and no matter what level we were at, now we're facing our demons at a whole different level, and we have to, and it's like we've never descended into the dungeon before. It's like we've never lifted weights before. It's like we've never played the piano before, right? I've used all of these analogies, and we've all experienced our own versions of this in life, where we thought we were hot shit because we got to whatever level. You know who experiences this a lot? high school collegiates, high school athletes who they are, or valedictorians for that matter, students in their school, they're the top of the top. They're the best athlete or the best student and the valedictorian or the most handsome, the whatever, right? And they're just the top of the top. And then they go off to university and all of a sudden, boom, they find themselves in the middle. Or they go into certain classes and they're confronted with material that all of a sudden makes them feel like small, like they don't know anything. Or the collegiate athlete who goes to university and joins varsity football, and he was the quarterback and the all-star player of his high school team, but then he goes and he tries out for varsity and he barely makes the team and he sits on the bench most of the season. And he's humbled and he feels small and useless and weak. We've all experienced our version of that. And that is the test that's challenging us to die to that person that we were, in order that we can give birth to the person that we need to be. And the person that we need to be is our higher self. So everything that mattered to our lower self, our personality, our ego, now it's all that's being challenged. All that's being, right? It's all that's being shown. Our its limitations are being revealed to us. Why? By this new test, this new challenge, this new ordeal. And we're being shown, listen, this new test, this new ordeal, that person you were is not qualified to overcome this new ordeal. You got to dig deep. You got to become a whole new person to overcome this test, this challenge. But whereas the self-help gurus and the self-help industry teach you a flawed methodology to construct a new self, to conceptualize and construct a new self, to reorganize, right? Reconfigure a new version of you in order to overcome these tests and challenges so you can succeed, so you can once again pat yourself on the back, so you can once again rise above. True spirituality, true development is the path of the phoenix. You let your old self die, not so you can construct a new self, but so that the self who you truly are can be born into the world. The innermost intimate Christ can be born, who's the fire of fire and the light of lights. That's the phoenix born of the ashes. And the ashes are what remain when we allow ourselves, our old selves that no longer serve us, to be consumed in the flames of the trial by fire. This is the key. Death and rebirth, but not rebirth of a new false self. That's the new age self-help bullshit that I began 2025 talking about way back in January. I devoted several live streams to talking about that whole self-help grift, because there's no point robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? If you're gonna remain stuck in a mortal paradigm, well, if you think that God is there and all the gifts of God within you that you are here to bring into the world, if you think all of that is for your benefit, then you are awakening negatively. You are awakening as a Hasnamusin with a split center of gravity. And I've spoken about all of these topics at length. What we need to do is die. What we need to do is let go. And remember that there's parts of us that don't want to let go, that don't want to die. And fear is going to come. Fear is going to claw into us and onto us and desperately try to hold on, because that is the most primal instinct that we have, is the survival instinct. And that's what fear is there for, self-preservation. But it's just the fact that the spiritual path is a path of psychological death. To die before we die, so that when we die, we do not die. To die while we're still alive. That's what all of these tests and trials are all about. That's what handing off the baton is really about. You're taking the baton away from this old self, and you're handing it to your higher self. And you're becoming the vehicle, the vessel for your higher self. You're not replacing one ego with another, right? You're replacing ego with no ego. But that doesn't mean there's no self. It just means that that self is selfless. And that's the paradox that the ego mind can't come to grips with. That the I can't square, and that the I is terrified of. Because the I, all the algorithms of the ego are selfish. Self-preservation, self-aggrandizement, self-obsession, or self-loathing, self-love, again, or self-loathing, self-infatuation, and on it goes. Me, 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 me. But there is another self within us whose fundamental nature is selflessness. And that's the paradox. That's what trips the Buddhists up when they talk about no self and getting to a place of no self, and they think that their work is done because they've achieved shunyata, or calm abiding, and they've achieved a state of no self. I say, well, that's fine, but that just means you're an empty cup. But it's not until you have faith and you are completely faithful to your innermost intimate essence of selflessness, and that selflessness pours forth into the world through you, that you are really on the path. Because emptying your cup and being an empty vessel, well, that's great. But what good is an empty vessel that just remains empty? Braziel 5 says, always appreciated the story. It is a divine tale. Well, thank you, Braziel, and we appreciate you being here. So you're always appreciated when you're listening in. So thank you for that. So who tests us and when and why? Hopefully I've covered that. But if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to take your questions or comments. But this is why we are tested. And I can tell you that it doesn't get easier. But remember that familiarity brings with it a sort of faith. Remember what I said earlier about what Eduardo said earlier about faith being knowledge. And real knowledge is born of experience, experiential knowledge. So when you've been through this process before, right? When you've gone around the revolutions of Aum before, and you got through it before, and especially when you got through it by surrendering, by allowing, by humbling yourself, and allowing your innermost to take over and to deliver you the answers and to deliver you from whatever trials that you were facing, then that gives you the faith to be able to take the next leap of faith. And so that when you next face the demon at a different level, you have faith in your innermost being and your divine mother, who is the one who's putting that test in front of you. You have faith that if you stay true to yourself, and if you stay true to your convictions, and if you stay true to your promise that my life was forfeit, but I put my life in your hands and you delivered me, and so therefore my life is in your hands, and my life is yours to live. The next time you face what seems to be an insurmountable challenge or a test or a trial or an ordeal, you have the faith, the knowledge, the experiential knowledge that you got through this before with God's help, right? With my innermost being's help. I just hand it off to God, my Lord and Master, my innermost essence of God within, and He will get me through this. I just have to have patience and resilience and allow for the answer to come in its own time, in its own way. In the meantime, I will focus on myself and I will observe all the garbage that's trying to fill up and clog my vessel. And I'm going to try to empty all that stuff out. I'm going to try to remain an empty vessel. And it's okay if the voices come up telling me this, judgment, self-loathing, self-sabotage, and self-sabotaging behaviors. I'm going to observe all that. I'm going to try to keep it at a minimum, but I'm not going to be really hard on myself, and I'm not going to try to, beat myself up or judge myself. I'm going to recognize that the adversary is trying to take advantage of me, the mortal, and in doing so, trying to fill me up with negativity to block out my higher self and prevent my higher self from entering my vessel and getting me through this test. And that because I'm an earthen vessel, right? And I need to be fired in the kiln. I need to go through this trial by fire. And that's part of the process. It's part of the process of hardening and becoming strong stoneware to be able to have greater capacity and greater integrity, to be able to embody more of my higher self, more of the the water that comes from the eternal spring of sweet ambrosia, and for that water to be transmuted into wine, right? I need to be a vessel worthy of that. And that means that vessel needs to be fired in the kiln, and sometimes fired multiple times. If I'm not completely out to lunch on that, but certainly when you're talking about forging a sword, right? Swords have to be quenched and fired and quenched and fired and folded, and the metal folded many hundreds of times and quenched and fired and folded, right? That's another analogy. So I'm pretty sure that there are types of earthenware and stoneware that have to be fired and worked with multiple times, and they have multiple trips into and out of the kiln, and they're fired multiple times, and they are the strongest and the hardiest of vessels. That's certainly the case for us. So yeah, and if you're facing really difficult challenges, really what seem to be impossible challenges, then all the more reason to hand it over to God and just put your faith and trust in God and make the promise. Right? It says, my life is over. My life is forfeit. This thing, whatever I'm facing, if it's, if it's a, a medical condition or some other like, career devastation or the end of a marriage or like any number of tragic circumstances that can befall us mortals. Everything happens for a reason. And the more difficult and the more tragic and the more life altering, life bending, life ending the nature of those circumstances, the more appropriate the response of total surrender and total allowing and giving it all over to your innermost being, because maybe that's why the tragedy has befallen your life, because you've finally gotten to that level that I was talking about where it's you've surpassed the level of mere mortal. And so if you can't keep going on the path as a mere mortal, if you're at the level that's needs to surpass that of a mere mortal, now you have to you have to continue your life as a vessel of the immortal, as a vessel, a servant, perhaps a messenger, but you're now working for a higher power. You're coming at life from a different place, a higher place. And so, uh, but there needs to be a catalyst, a test, an exorcise, which makes that flip, which a trial by fire, which makes of you a stoneware vessel worthy of the water that's transformed into wine. Any comments or questions from anyone? Anybody care to share their stories? No pressure, no obligation. I I mentioned, that I'm what I was going through and what I am going through and what I probably will continue to go through for some time. My father passed away, and now both my parents have passed away, and I've been left with the task of getting rid of all of their stuff and getting rid of all of my old stuff as well in this house, because I need to sell this house. My brother and I inherited the house, and the decision is we have to get rid of the house. Now it's in probate right now, so we can't sell it anyway. But between now and then, I have to get rid of all this stuff, and it was the weight of that, of having all of that placed on me. I thought that my work was largely done, right? Taking care of my dad and so on for the last few years. But no, it's my responsibility to sell what I can sell, throw away what needs to be thrown away, etc. And I was doing things like going through some of my old files, like all the plays and whatnot that I did back in university, and there's all this, like, this stuff that I know that if I move out of here, I can't take it with me. And so there's all of these artifacts and this material that relates to the person that I was. And the prospect of just throwing it all away, it triggered in me that that entity that causes my depression, also causes seizures. It's the fear, right? It's fear. It's like there's a whole bunch of stuff here that represents comfort and security. Like the house represents comfort and security. Because for the last 25 years, no matter where I went in the world, I could always come back to this house. And now that's going to be gone. And I'm just going to be renting something. And that's not permanent. That's not solid. That's not stable. It's not really a home. And I'm going to be by myself in some rented place. That's not home. It's just a place. But whereas before, when I had a place, I could always go home, if you catch my meaning, right? There was always a place to go home to, a place that had family and was always welcoming, and I had a room of my own, a space of my own in that home, and it was like a little sanctuary. Yeah, it was a man cave. Sure, you can call it that. And so the space that I'm in is filled with artifacts and accumulated stuff from a lifetime. And now I'm faced with the prospect and the reality that I have to let all this stuff go because I can't take it with me. And so it's a kind of death. I'm facing a kind of death. But I also realize that it's absolutely necessary because it's time for me to level up and go to the next stage of my life. And I can't be tied down to a physical place, and I can't be tied down to a house with all of its expenses and all of its upkeep and everything else, because I need to focus on, what I'm here to do. And my innermost being, Attlas, is not here to be a groundskeeper and what do you call it, a maid, right? There's nothing wrong with being a groundskeeper or a maid, but that's not what Attlas came here for. Yeah, I was doing all the yard work, and I was, cleaning the house here and looking after my dad for many years, and my mom before that when she had cancer. And so I did all that work, but now this is a big empty house with just me in it. Doesn't make sense for me to be here anymore. Doesn't make sense for me to be the groundskeeper, the caretaker of an empty house. That's not what Attlas is here for. And now that my parents are gone and my responsibility to my family is done, my last job is to get rid of all the junk, to clear out the house, and so that my brother and I can sell it and move on. But with that, all of the comfort and security that my old self, all of the identification and attachment to the comfort and security that this physical place offered and provided, it was a sanctuary, it was a safe haven, it was home. Well, the prospect of losing that, the prospect of throwing everything away, the prospect of giving it all up, obviously, that aspect of my psychology that is identified and attached to the comfort and security that those things provided, that thing is having a mental breakdown. And as it has its breakdown, as it rages in my subconscious mind, I experienced that on the surface as falling into depression, all my energy being drained out of me, and I lack the motivation to be able to actually do the work of actually, putting stuff online and selling it or throwing stuff in the garbage. And right, it's like I have no energy to lift any boxes. I have no, like, the motivation is sucked out of me, as the parts of me that doesn't want to let it go doesn't want to let me do the work that I need to do in order to let it go. So I'm at a crossroads, right? But that's when I remember that I'm just a mortal and that I have to give it to God, right? I got to put it in God's hands. I got to put it into Atlas's hands. And so, but that's what I'm facing. That's the brass tacks, down to earth reason that today we're talking about tests and trials and ordeals, because um you know I don't want any of you to ever think, or ever I don't want to leave any of you ever with the wrong impression, or to think that I somehow think of myself as being on some god only knows what kind of level or whatever, right? No, I'm down in the shit with all of you, right? We're all in hell. That's why called my book What in Hell is With Us, right? And I'm here and I'm down and I'm suffering with you, and you guys need to know that, because the last thing I want to be is as a hypocrite. And the last thing that I want to be is a false prophet and a false guru, presenting myself like so many of those gurus do, right? I'm not here to be idolized or worshipped, or to look upon in awe, No, 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 no. I'm just someone who's suffering the same way you are, but maybe I have an advantage in that I have some insight into the nature of that suffering, and that I have within me the light of consciousness shining a light on my own defects and vices, and the machinations by which those defects and vices cause me suffering and impede my ability to fulfill my duty to my higher self and to fulfill my role in life. And so that's a learning opportunity, that's a teaching opportunity, right? And that is part and parcel with why I'm here, and that's part and parcel of my purpose, is for us to be able to have these conversations, and for you to know that you are not alone in the tests that you face, the trials that you have to endure, the suffering that you endure, feeling lost in the desert, feeling lost and forsaken and stuck in hell. You are not alone. Or feeling like you're facing this demon again, oh, for the millionth time. How is that possible? Well, because you got to face it at deeper and deeper and deeper levels of the dungeon. And it's also, as I've told you many times, these live streams are as much for my benefit as they are for yours, because I can't afford to go talk to a counselor, and I'm not going to sit here and do a nearly 3 hour talk like this, to one of my friends, right? That's not appropriate. No, nobody's signing on to that to be my personal therapist or counselor or psychoanalyst or whatever. But all of you, because you stand to benefit from this my suffering, and by sharing it with you for your benefit, I also get the benefit of hearing for the first time many things expressed, because Atlas speaks through me. And because Attlas is telling you what you need to hear, guess what? I get to hear what I need to hear. And that's why self-observation is so important. We have to listen to what comes out of our mouth. Where is that coming from? Who is saying this? And why does it matter? Why is it so important? And why is it really important that I pay attention to it and take it to heart? Aha. Now, this is something that I've learned, especially over the last 5 years of doing this live stream, that I do some of my most meaningful, powerful, and potent insights have come on this program, sharing with all of you for your sake, for your benefit. I have learned more by sharing with you than I have lying in the bed by myself meditating just for my own sake. Because that's just the nature, the fundamental nature of the essence of who Attlas is. It's that selflessness. And I, because I've committed my life to Attlas and his work and his mission, and Attlas is committed to Alux, because Alux is the essence and nature of Attlas, and Alux is all light, God light, the fire of fires and the light of lights and the being of beings. That's selfless, pure selflessness in action. That is the ultimate essence, the ultimate nature that I have devoted my life to. Why? Because that is what gave me my life back. When epilepsy took it away, when the demon of epilepsy, the demon of fear, took it away from me, it was Alux through Attlas who gave it back to me. And it's just only natural then that it is by embodying that acts of selflessness that's the only way that I benefit. It's the only way I can benefit in life anymore, is to fulfill my duty as a vessel and a servant and a messenger to that essence of selflessness. And so that's why me being here and sharing with all of you for all of your sake, that it's as much for my benefit as it is for yours, because I am receiving just as you are receiving. And that's a good reminder to me as well, that the only way that I'm going to get over the current obstacle and the current hell that I find myself in and be able to muster up the courage and the strength to actually put my nose to the grindstone and actually do the work that needs to be done to let go of all of this and to take that next step towards death, psychological death, is to remember and align with and really well and truly embrace that essence of selflessness. That it's getting more stuff out of the way. It's emptying my vessel even more. And that, yes, the demon is going to resist that, and he's going to freak out, and he's going to try to sabotage it. And, 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 and that's just the way it goes. But I faced that demon before on other levels, and I know who it is that defeats that demon. It's not me. It's not me. Alexi said, my condolences. Thank you. Thank you, Alexi. Benjamin says, I'm sorry to hear about your recent challenges. That must have been a sudden and difficult transition. When we're in when we're in a comfortable place, our ego and the fears or insecurities tied to it often stays hidden. How can we work with these aspects of ourselves when they're quiet, so that when they do surface, we're better prepared to face them. Well, you bring up a good point. And that is, it's very, very, it's impossible to work with them when we're in a comfortable place, right? That's why our fear and our egos want comfort and security. It's because when we have comfort and security, they can live in anonymity. So that's the whole point of having our comfort and security challenged. We have that expression, to shake things up. That's why we shake things up. Because when we shake things up, that which has become complacent with us, they're disturbed, right? We've disturbed their rest and they come alive and they react. And it's that then that we can observe them in their reactions. That's why we have conflict. That's why our Divine Mother attracts circumstances and people into our life that trigger us. Why? Because we are attracting them by virtue of what we are, those psychological aggregates, those egos inside of us that require that circumstances or people trigger them so that they come into activity, so that they are disturbed. And in that disturbance, if we are observing ourselves, we can observe them. But you make an excellent point here, is that if we're living in the lap of luxury, or at the very least comfort and security, then we're living in complacency, and we don't really know what we're suffering from. We don't really know what our fears are, and we don't really know how powerful a hold our fears still have over us. So, as a point of interest, on the day of my father's funeral, I had 4 seizures. Because the rest of the time, things are pretty easy and pretty, I'm not under a lot of stress or pressure in my life. I've taken great pains to reduce the amount of stress and pressure in my life. But that particular day was a culmination of weeks of funerary preparations, and I was under the gun to the celebration of life, the catering and everything. Like, I had organized all of that. And the day of, and I was the one who had to write the eulogy, and I was the one who was going to deliver the eulogy. And it was, my father, my last living parent, dying, and it was the fear fed on all of those circumstances, and that empowered, that triggered it, that brought it to the surface, and it allowed it to inflict upon me 4 seizures that day. Luckily, none during the eulogy, thank heavens. But it just goes to show you, unless you are tested, unless you face a trial, you don't really know how strong or how weak you are, and you don't really know how strong or how weak your demons are, what kind of a hold they still have over you. So just imagine, had I chosen to drive that day, because one of my seizures was in the car. My nephew was driving me to the mausoleum. Imagine, had I been driving that day and I would have had a seizure in the car on my way to the mausoleum, they might have had a second funeral that day. Leah says, Diamonds need pressure to shine. Yeah, diamonds are formed under pressure. I'm not saying the pressure is not a bad thing. I mean, this is why tests and trials and ordeals is why we lift weights, right? To build muscle, of course. But this is anyway, Benjamin follows up here. He says, "Thank you so much for the explanation and for today's live stream. I learned a lot. I think this really highlights why so many people are struggling right now. We're living in a time where instant gratification is everywhere, and our minds are constantly bombarded with pleasure and stimulation. In such an environment, it's becoming increasingly difficult to stay genuinely spiritually motivated." Okay, so this is an excellent point that Benjamin makes, where everything is about instant gratification and getting what you want. And so much of the new age is about manifesting your desires, right? And that's all black magic. And hopefully, part of today has explained and expressed why discomfort and being disturbed and being tested and being tried, and the humiliation that comes with that, being humbled, right? Recognizing that at some point you're in your journey, you're going to have to face the reality that as a mortal, I am not qualified to do the work of an immortal, right? Like that's um this is what the alter ego in superheroes is about, right? This is why Bruce Wayne has to give himself over to Batman, because Bruce Wayne can't do what Batman needs to be able to do, or Clark Kent can't be Superman. Superman is Superman, but Superman, in order for Superman to be in this world, he has to assume the persona of Clark Kent. And Clark needs to go to work and have a job, and he can't be Superman. He has to be Clark Kent. And this actually was explored in Superman 3, when you have this fight between Clark Kent and Superman, but really it's his shadow, it's Superman's shadow, his dark side. And it was a very, very interesting I haven't watched it in years, but this is that notion of, there's the mortal, the vessel, and then there's the Superman, the true hero. And the other analogy that I really like is the one of Iron Man, because Iron Man he's a suit. He's a mechanical suit, and Iron Man has an AI named Jarvis. And the AI of Jarvis and the suit serves the inner hero of Tony Stark. But Tony Stark can't be Iron Man without the suit and without the help he gets from Jarvis. So this is all related to the fact that we mortals, we serve a purpose. We have a function, and it's a necessary, required function, in the same way that the spring needs a vessel to get its life-giving waters to the village. It needs that earthenware, that stoneware vessel. Just like in order for Jesus to change the water into wine at the wedding of Canaan, there needs to be vessels filled with water available, right? So, but the problem is, as Benjamin's pointing out here, that we're living in an age of instant gratification and materialism, and really selfishness and vanity and narcissism. That's why there's all this like victimization, and the younger generations who were raised by helicopter parents, and it goes on and on and on. We can go for hours talking about all of this, but it's so me focused, and it's what I want, and everything delivered to my door, and even Alexa um, um, mentioned, or sorry, Alexi mentioned the COVID earlier, or was it Alexi? Or yes, it was Alexi, wasn't it? Yeah, during COVID. And COVID really galvanized and hammered home this homebody living at home and everything being delivered to your door, right? DoorDash and all these home delivery companies, and Amazon's profits soared, and Netflix and all of these streaming services came online during COVID as well, because everybody was at home. They couldn't go anywhere. Everything was shut down. And so this all feeds into this. Everything is coming to me. All I have to do is sit here and type in what I want, and everything comes to me. Everything comes to me. That's like technology mirroring the new age dogma of the law of attraction and manifesting your desires. And that's all a false spirituality, because everything flows to me, everything flows to me, everything flows to me. Where true spirituality, the true essence and nature of spirit, is selflessness. It's that spring, that eternal spring inside. That's like any spring, like any source. That's why we call it source, because the water just flows and flows and flows, but it needs a vessel. It needs a vessel. That's us. And the tests and the trials and the ordeals we face are there to mold us, to shape us, and fire us in the kiln. Those are the trials by fire, to transform our soft, moldy, not moldy, soft, malleable uh, bodies into hardened stoneware, earthenware vessels with integrity, with durability, with resilience, and with capacity, with ever-growing capacity. But that's a spirituality that doesn't sell, you see? That's why there's so few of you watching this live stream. And that's why there's so few people who buy my book. Because people don't want the truth. People don't want real spirituality. They want black magic. They want that which serves them. They don't want to be selfless. They want to serve their ego. Benjamin says, the scripture says, for he is like a refiner's fire. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. That's Malachi 3:2. That's a great quote, Benjamin. I appreciate that. Thank you. What's fascinating is that a refiner knows the silver is ready only when he can see his own reflection in it. Oh, very interesting. Very good. That's really good. I did not know that about silver. That's when you know that silver is pure, when it's like a mirror. But that's really good. Thank you for that, Benjamin. I appreciate that. All right then. Look, we just hit the 3-hour mark. If there's any more comments or questions, please take a few moments to type them now. I'll give you a couple minutes or a minute or so to do that. I want to thank you all for spending your Sunday afternoon with me again, as usual. I want to thank you for listening. As I said, this is very much like therapy for me. Just as if it's information for you, rest assured. Especially this week, it was therapy for me because of the week that I had, and suffice it to say, probably the week that's still ahead of me, and the months ahead of me now. Because if I actually get down to it and start really rolling up my sleeves and doing what needs to be done and emptying out this place and putting the stuff online and starting to sell it and doing all that work on that behalf. But there's also the likelihood, the possibility that this website that we made, Eduardo and I, you know, we, in terms of attraction and law of attraction, I do hope that we can start attracting some clients and start getting to work on putting the magic and meaning back into some of these businesses and media campaigns and properties, some movies and TV shows, or some video games, and putting some real truth and meaning back into it, because the world is craving it so desperately. Um, and so, we'll be posting more stuff with Atlas CA on Facebook and on the blog. And like I say, this week was tough, but hopefully it'll be better now after today. So I want to thank you all for coming and listening, and hope to see you again soon. If there's no more questions or comments, then again, I want to thank you, express my sincere gratitude for you being here. Have a great week. All the best to you and yours. Take care of yourselves. I hope to see you again next week. And until then, as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.